I found my 8-year-old granddaughter shivering in the snow outside her own front door on Christmas Eve. Sarah slammed it in my face when I demanded answers. That's when I realized my sweet daughter-in-law wasn't who I thought she was. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how I got to this point. Standing in the freezing cold, looking at little Emma's tear-streaked face while Christmas carols played mockingly from inside the house. My name is Dorothy Williams, though everyone calls me Dot. I'm 68 years old, been a widow for 3 years since my Harold passed, and I thought I knew my family. Boy, was I wrong about that. It started 2 hours earlier when I pulled into Kevin and Sarah's driveway with my car loaded down with wrapped presents and ingredients for my famous Christmas morning cinnamon rolls. The house looked picture perfect, just like something from those home magazines Sarah's always buying. Twinkling lights, perfectly arranged wreaths, not a single decoration out of place. I knocked on the front door, balancing gift bags and my overnight case, expecting to hear Emma's excited squeal and feel her little arms wrap around my waist. Instead, Sarah opened the door wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Dorothy. Not Mom, not even a smile. Just my name spoken like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I said, pushing down the familiar knot that formed in my stomach whenever Sarah used that particular tone. "Where's my Emma?" Sarah stepped back reluctantly, letting me into the foyer. The house smelled like expensive candles and something else, something cold I couldn't quite identify. "Emma is learning about consequences," Sarah said, smoothing her perfectly blown-out hair. "She broke one of my Waterford crystal ornaments this morning, completely destroyed it." I set down my bags and looked around. Kevin was nowhere to be seen, probably holed up in his home office like always. The living room was immaculate, every pillow fluffed, every surface gleaming. It looked more like a showroom than a place where a child lived. "Where is she?" I asked again. Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. "Outside, thinking about what she's done. Children need to understand that actions have consequences, Dorothy. Maybe if more parents actually parented instead of spoiling their children rotten, we wouldn't have so many entitled brats running around." The knot in my stomach turned to ice. "You put her outside?" "It's 28 degrees. She has her coat," Sarah said dismissively, walking toward the kitchen. "She can come in when she's ready to apologize properly and promise it won't happen again." I followed her, my mind reeling. In the kitchen, Kevin stood at the island with a glass of wine, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when we entered, giving me that weak smile he'd perfected over the years. "Hey, Mom, how was the drive?" "Kevin, your daughter is outside in the snow," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. He glanced at Sarah, who was now arranging cheese and crackers on a marble board with surgical precision. "Sarah's handling it," he said finally. "Emma needs to learn respect for nice things." That's when I knew something was very wrong in this perfect house. I walked straight to the back door without another word. Through the glass, I could see Emma huddled against the patio furniture, her little body trembling despite her pink winter coat. Snow was falling steadier now, collecting on her dark hair. My granddaughter looked up when she heard the door open. Her cheeks were red with cold, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Grandma Dot," she whispered, "Mommy says I can't come in until I learn my lesson." I was down on one knee in seconds, pulling her against me. "What lesson, baby girl?" "I accidentally bumped into the Christmas tree when I was trying to reach my present," Emma said, her voice small. "One of Mommy's special ornaments fell and broke. I said I was sorry, but she said sorry doesn't fix expensive things." Over Emma's head, I could see Sarah watching us through the window, her arms crossed. Kevin stood behind her, and neither of them looked like they planned to intervene. "How long have you been out here, sweetheart?" "Since lunch," Emma whispered. "Mommy made me eat outside, too. She said I could think about what I did wrong while I ate my sandwich." Since lunch. It was nearly 6 o'clock now. This child had been outside in the cold for almost 5 hours over an accident. An accident any normal 8-year-old might have. I stood up, taking Emma's frozen little hand in mine. "Come on, baby. We're going inside." I marched straight back through that door with Emma behind me. Sarah was waiting in the kitchen, her face a mask of controlled irritation. "Dorothy, please don't undermine my parenting. Emma needs to understand." "The only thing Emma needs to understand is that she's loved," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Kevin, go start a warm bath for your daughter. Right now. Kevin looked between Sarah and me like a deer caught in headlights. Maybe we should all just calm down. Calm down? I felt something inside me snap. Your 8-year-old daughter has been outside in freezing weather for 5 hours because she accidentally broke an ornament. There is nothing calm about that. Sarah's mask slipped slightly. That ornament cost $400, Dorothy. It was a limited edition Waterford piece from their Christmas collection. Emma needs to understand that carelessness has real consequences. She's 8 years old, which is old enough to be more careful, Sarah shot back. Maybe if people stopped treating children like they're made of glass, they'd actually develop some sense of responsibility. I looked at Kevin, waiting for him to defend his daughter, to show even a spark of the man I'd raised, to stand up for what was right. Instead, he took another sip of wine and stared at his phone. That's when I understood what I was really seeing here. I took Emma upstairs myself, running her a warm bath and helping her out of her damp clothes. As I wrapped her in a fluffy towel, she looked up at me with those big brown eyes that reminded me so much of Kevin at that age. Am I in trouble, Grandma? No, sweetheart. You're not in trouble. I smoothed her dark hair away from her face. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too. Sometimes they forget what's really important. While Emma soaked in the tub, I called my best friend Maggie from the hallway. She answered on the second ring. Dot, how's Christmas Eve at the Perfect Household? Maggie, I need you to do something for me, I said quietly, keeping my voice low. I need you to look up the divorce laws in this state, specifically what grandparents' rights look like. There was a pause. Oh, honey, what's happened? I told her everything. When I finished, Maggie was quiet for a long moment. That's not parenting, Dot. That's abuse. I know. The word felt heavy in my mouth. The question is, what can I do about it? Well, for starters, document everything. Take pictures, keep notes, dates, times. And Dot, that little girl is lucky to have you. After I got Emma into her pajamas and settled with a cup of hot chocolate, I went back downstairs. Kevin and Sarah were in the living room now, sitting by their perfect fireplace, like nothing had happened. Sarah looked up when I entered. I hope you understand that what happened tonight can't happen again, Dorothy. I won't have my authority undermined in my own home. Your authority? I sat down across from them, studying my daughter-in-law's face, really looking at her, maybe for the first time since Kevin had brought her home 5 years ago. Sarah, can I ask you something? She tilted her head, probably expecting some kind of apology. Have you ever actually loved that little girl? Or is she just something else you have to manage perfectly? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kevin set down his wine glass with a sharp clink. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? I kept my eyes on Sarah. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you see Emma as a problem to be solved, rather than a child to be loved. Sarah's smile was ice cold. I see Emma as a child who needs structure and discipline. Maybe if more people understood that, we wouldn't have a generation of entitled, disrespectful kids running around thinking the world owes them something. She's 8, Sarah. She broke an ornament by accident. And now she knows to be more careful, Sarah said with a shrug. That's how children learn. I looked at Kevin, silently pleading with him to see what I was seeing, but my son just sat there, spineless as always when it came to his wife. That's when I knew I had to dig deeper. The next morning, Christmas Day, I watched Sarah orchestrate the gift opening like a military operation. Emma had to wait for permission before touching each present, had to clean up the wrapping paper immediately after opening each one, and had to write thank you notes for every single gift before moving on to the next. The joy was systematically drained out of Christmas morning until Emma was just going through the motions, her excitement replaced by careful obedience. But I was watching more than just the presents. I was watching the way Sarah controlled every aspect of that house, every interaction, every moment. Kevin moved through his own home like a guest, asking Sarah's permission for everything from when to eat breakfast to what television channel they could watch. When Sarah went upstairs to freshen up, I cornered Kevin in the kitchen. Son, we need to talk. He was loading the dishwasher, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned exactly how Sarah liked things done. Mom, please don't start. It's Christmas. Kevin, look at me. I waited until he turned around. When did you stop being the father in this house? His face flushed. That's not... Sarah and I are partners. We make decisions together. Do you? Because what I saw last night was you letting your wife emotionally abuse your daughter while you stood there drinking wine. Mom, you don't understand. Sarah has a system. Emma was fine. Emma was not fine. I kept my voice low but firm. She was outside in freezing weather for 5 hours, Kevin. 5 hours. And you let it happen. He turned back to the dishwasher, his shoulders tense. Sarah knows what she's doing. She has a degree in child development. From where? Kevin paused, his hands still on the dishes. What? Where did Sarah get her degree in child development? Which school? The silence stretched between us. Finally, Kevin said, I don't remember exactly. Some college in California. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. In 5 years of marriage, through countless conversations about Emma's schooling and development, Sarah had mentioned her education expertise constantly. But now, asked directly, Kevin couldn't even name the school. Kevin, have you ever actually seen Sarah's degree? He shut the dishwasher harder than necessary. Mom, stop. Just stop. But I couldn't stop. Not anymore. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want you to really think about your answer. Are you happy? Is Emma happy? Is this the life you wanted for your family? When he looked at me, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. A flicker of the sun I'd raised. The one who used to stand up to bullies on the playground. Sometimes I wonder, he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. That's when I knew my real work was just beginning. That afternoon, while Sarah was busy organizing her Christmas gifts by category and Kevin was watching football in his study, I offered to take Emma to the park. Sarah agreed, probably happy to have us out of her perfectly controlled environment. As Emma played on the swings, I sat on a bench and called my friend Patricia, who worked in family court. Patricia, hypothetically, if someone suspected a child was being emotionally abused, what would be the first steps? Documentation, she said immediately. Photos, recordings if legal in your state, witnesses. But you have to be careful. If this goes to court and you don't have solid evidence, you could lose all access to that child. While Emma played, I started taking pictures. Not of Emma having fun, but of her behavior. The way she looked over her shoulder constantly, checking to make sure she wasn't doing anything wrong. How she asked permission before going down the slide. The anxious way she chewed her bottom lip. These weren't the behaviors of a confident, happy 8-year-old. When we got back to the house, I made my move. Sarah, I was thinking, Emma's been such a good girl today. Maybe we could order her favorite pizza for dinner? Sarah looked up from her color-coded gift inventory spreadsheet. Emma doesn't have favorite foods, Dorothy. She eats what's nutritionally appropriate for her age and activity level. She's never mentioned liking any particular food. I don't cater to children's whims, Sarah said matter-of-factly. Emotional eating is how people develop unhealthy relationships with food. I glanced at Emma, who was sitting quietly at the kitchen table with a coloring book. What do you like to eat, sweetheart? Emma looked quickly at Sarah before answering. Whatever Mommy makes is good. But I caught the longing look she gave the pizza delivery magnet on the refrigerator. Later that evening, while Sarah was in her nightly phone call with her sister, a conversation that always seemed to involve a lot of complaints about how difficult everyone else made her life, I did something I'd never done before. I went through Sarah's home office. The desk was as organized as everything else in the house, with labeled folders and color-coded filing systems. But it was what I found in the bottom drawer that made my blood run cold. A folder labeled Emma Behavioral Issues contained detailed notes about Emma's infractions going back 2 years. Talking too loudly during dinner, leaving toys out, crying when disciplined, not immediately complying with instructions. Each entry was dated and described in clinical language, like Emma was a problem to be solved rather than a child to be loved. But it was the note at the bottom of the latest entry that made me sit down hard in Sarah's designer chair. Considering more intensive behavioral modification strategies, Kevin remains too permissive, may need to limit his influence on Emma's discipline. I took pictures of every page with my phone, my hands shaking slightly. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Dorothy, what are you doing in here? I looked up to see Sarah standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. Looking for the truth, I said calmly, closing the folder but not hiding what I'd been doing. And I think I found it. Sarah stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. When she turned back to me, the mask was completely gone. What I saw in her eyes wasn't anger or embarrassment. It was calculation. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she said softly. "That little girl was a monster when I met Kevin. Spoiled, undisciplined, completely out of control. I've spent 5 years turning her into a civilized human being. Emma was 3 years old when you married Kevin." "Exactly. Old enough to have developed terrible habits from Kevin's permissive parenting and your indulgent grandmothering." Sarah moved closer, her voice never rising above a whisper. "Do you know what Emma used to do when she didn't get her way? She'd throw screaming tantrums. She'd hit Kevin. She'd refuse to eat anything that wasn't chicken nuggets or mac and cheese. She was a toddler." "Sarah, that's normal behavior." Sarah's laugh was hollow. "Normal behavior is what creates entitled adults who think the world revolves around them. I've spent 5 years breaking those patterns, teaching Emma self-control and respect, and it's worked." I thought about the anxious little girl who asked permission to go down a slide. "You've terrorized her into compliance." "I've given her structure," Sarah said firmly, "something she desperately needed." "And Kevin? Have you given him structure too?" Something flickered in Sarah's eyes. "Kevin is a weak man who needed a strong woman to take care of him. He makes good money. He's reasonably attractive, and he doesn't ask too many questions. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." The coldness in her voice sent chills down my spine. "You don't love them at all, do you?" Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying me. "Love is a chemical reaction that leads to poor decision-making. I provide stability, financial management, and social status. In return, I have a comfortable life and a child who will grow up to be a productive member of society instead of another entitled brat. Emma is not a project, Sarah. She's a little girl." "Emma is exactly what I've made her," Sarah said. "And you're not going to undo 5 years of careful work with your sentimental nonsense." I stood up, the folder still in my hands. "We'll see about that." That's when Sarah smiled, and I realized I'd just declared war on someone who'd been planning battles since before I knew we were fighting. "Dorothy," she said pleasantly, "I think it's time you went home." Sarah had me escorted out of the house by Kevin like I was some kind of criminal, but she made one crucial mistake. She underestimated a grandmother who'd been planning her next move since the moment I found Emma shivering in that snow. The drive home gave me time to think clearly for the first time in 2 days. Sarah wasn't just controlling, she was dangerous. And Kevin, my own son, was too weak or too scared to protect his daughter. That left me. At home, I spread everything out on my kitchen table like a detective working a case. The photos I'd taken of Emma's anxious behavior, pictures of that behavioral modification folder, screenshots of my research into emotional abuse tactics. It painted a picture that would make any reasonable person sick. But I needed more than pictures. I needed proof that would hold up if this went to court. I called my friend Janet, who'd worked as a social worker for 30 years before retiring. After I explained the situation, there was a long silence. "What you're describing sounds like coercive control," she said finally. "It's a recognized form of psychological abuse, but proving it, especially when the child has been conditioned not to speak up, that's going to be challenging. What would you need to see? Documentation of the control tactics, evidence of isolation. Does Sarah limit Emma's contact with friends, activities, even you? And ideally, testimony from someone who's witnessed the behavior." I thought about Christmas morning, how Emma had asked permission for everything, how she'd looked terrified when I suggested pizza, how she'd automatically answered what Sarah wanted to hear instead of expressing her own preferences. "Janet, what if I could get Emma to talk freely when she's away from Sarah? That could be valuable." "But you have to be careful. If Sarah finds out you're gathering evidence, she might cut off your access completely. And that little girl needs at least one advocate in her life." After we hung up, I made a decision. I was going to fight for Emma, but I was going to be smart about it. I started with Kevin's weakness. He'd always been susceptible to guilt, even as a child. The next morning I sent him a text. "I'm disappointed in the man you've become, but I still love you. Emma deserves better from her father." He called me within an hour. "Mom, Sarah says you went through her personal files. That's not okay. What's not okay is a child being terrorized in her own home, I said calmly. Kevin, I want you to think about something. When was the last time you made a decision about Emma without asking Sarah's permission first? Silence. When was the last time Emma hugged you without looking at Sarah first? When was the last time she laughed, really laughed, in your house? Mom, I'm not asking you to leave your wife. Kevin, I'm asking you to remember you're Emma's father. That afternoon, Kevin showed up at my house alone. Kevin sat at my kitchen table looking like a man who'd been carrying a weight he didn't know how to set down. When I placed a cup of coffee in front of him, his hands were shaking slightly. Tell me what you see when you look at your daughter, I said gently. He was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, I see a little girl who's afraid of making mistakes. And that doesn't concern you? Sarah says some children are naturally anxious. Emma just needs more structure than most kids. But his voice lacked conviction, like he was reciting lines he'd memorized. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken at the park. Emma looking over her shoulder before playing. Emma asking permission to go down the slide. Emma's anxious face as she colored quietly at the kitchen table. Does this look like natural anxiety to you? Kevin studied the photos, and I watched something shift in his expression. She used to be different, he whispered. Before Sarah, Emma used to sing all the time. She'd dance around the living room, make up stories, ask a million questions. She was so bright. What happened to that little girl? Sarah said she needed to learn self-control, that all that energy was disruptive and inappropriate. Kevin looked up at me with haunted eyes. I wanted to be a good father. Sarah seemed to know so much about child development. She had all these books, these theories. Kevin, have you ever actually verified Sarah's credentials? He frowned. What do you mean? I pulled out my laptop. Over the past day, I'd done some digging. You told me Sarah had a degree in child development from a college in California. Which college? I'm not sure exactly. Somewhere in San Diego, I think? There are several colleges in San Diego. Did she go to UCSD? San Diego State? Point Loma? National University? Kevin's frown deepened. She's mentioned it before, but I can't remember the specific name. I turned the laptop toward him. I spent yesterday calling every accredited program in San Diego. No record of a Sarah Bennett or Sarah Williams in any child development program from the years she would have attended. The color drained from Kevin's face. I also looked up her previous employment. She claims she worked as a family counselor in Los Angeles before moving here, right? Kevin nodded numbly. The company she listed on her resume? It went out of business 8 years ago. No records of former employees. I watched my son's world crumble in real time. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying your wife has been lying to you about her qualifications from the very beginning. She has no training in child development, Kevin. She's been experimenting on your daughter with techniques she learned from God knows where. Kevin buried his face in his hands. How could I have been so stupid? You trusted someone you loved. That's not stupid, son. But now you know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do about it? When he looked up, I saw a flicker of the strong man I'd raised. I need to protect Emma. That's when I knew we were finally on the same side. Kevin and I spent the next 3 days planning. He started documenting everything. Sarah's controlling behaviors, Emma's fearful responses, the rigid rules that governed every aspect of their home life. More importantly, he started pushing back in small ways. When Sarah insisted Emma eat her vegetables in a specific order, Kevin suggested she could eat them however she wanted. When Sarah criticized Emma for humming while she played, Kevin told Emma her humming was beautiful. Sarah's reaction was swift and revealing. She started attacking Kevin more openly, questioning his judgment, undermining his authority with Emma, threatening to handle things herself if he couldn't maintain appropriate discipline. But the breakthrough came on the 4th day when Kevin picked Emma up from school and took her to my house without telling Sarah. Emma walked into my living room like she was entering a minefield, her eyes darting around nervously. It's okay, sweetheart, I said softly. Would you like some cookies? I made chocolate chip. She looked at Kevin. Am I allowed? You can have as many as you want, Kevin said, his voice breaking slightly. I watched my granddaughter eat cookies like she'd never tasted anything so wonderful in her life. Slowly, carefully, like someone might take them away at any moment. Emma, I said gently, Can I ask you something? She nodded, chocolate smudging her small face. Are you happy at home? Emma's eyes immediately filled with tears. I try to be good, Grandma. I really try. Oh, sweetheart. I knelt down beside her chair. You are good. You're perfect exactly as you are. But Mommy says I need to be better. She says I'm too loud and too messy, and I ask too many questions. Kevin made a sound like he'd been punched. Emma, he said, kneeling down beside me. Do you remember when you were little, how we used to dance in the kitchen while I made dinner? A tiny smile flickered across Emma's face. You said I was your dancing partner. You still are. And you know what? Tomorrow night we're going to dance in the kitchen again. But Mommy doesn't like dancing. She says it's disruptive. Mommy doesn't get to decide whether we dance, Kevin said firmly. Daddies and daughters are allowed to dance whenever they want. For the first time in 2 years, Emma giggled. That's when my phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, and Emma immediately went rigid with fear. I answered. Hello, Sarah. Where is my husband and my daughter? Her voice was ice cold. Your husband picked up his daughter from school and brought her to visit her grandmother. Perfectly normal behavior. Bring them home. Now. No. The word hung in the air like a challenge. I could practically hear Sarah calculating her next move. Dorothy, you're interfering with my family. Emma is my family too. And Kevin is my son. Not your property. When Sarah spoke again, her voice carried a threat that made my blood run cold. You have no idea what you've started. But she was wrong about that. I knew exactly what I'd started. Sarah's counterattack came the next morning in the form of a legal document served by a process server at my front door. A restraining order claiming I was a disruptive influence who posed a threat to Emma's emotional stability and behavioral progress. The document was filled with lies so elaborate they almost seemed believable. Claims that I had undermined parental authority, encouraged defiant behavior, and interfered with established therapeutic protocols. But Sarah had made a critical error. In her eagerness to paint me as dangerous, she'd provided detailed descriptions of her therapeutic protocols for managing Emma's behavior. Protocols that no licensed professional would ever recommend. I called Patricia, the family law attorney Eleanor had recommended. This is actually good news, Patricia said after reviewing the documents. She's given us a roadmap of her control tactics. Look at this language. Systematic behavioral modification. Controlled environmental stimuli. Elimination of positive reinforcement for non-compliant behaviors. This reads like a psychological experiment. Not parenting. Can she keep me away from Emma? Temporarily, yes. But Dorothy, this restraining order is going to backfire on her spectacularly. I'm going to file a counter-petition requesting a child welfare evaluation. When a court sees these documents, they're going to have serious questions about Sarah's fitness as a parent. That evening, Kevin called me from his car. Mom, Emma asked where you were. When I told her about the restraining order, she started crying. She said she was sorry for making Mommy angry. My heart broke. Kevin, that little girl thinks this is her fault. I know, and Sarah, Mom, she's gotten worse since yesterday. She's watching Emma constantly, criticizing everything. This morning she made Emma redo her hair 3 times because it wasn't neat enough. You need to document everything, son. I am. But Mom, I found something else. I was looking through Sarah's computer files, and I found folder after folder of research. Articles about child psychology, behavior modification techniques, even some pretty disturbing stuff about breaking a child's will. I felt sick. She's been studying how to do this. There's more. I found communications with other women in online forums. They call themselves traditional wives, and they share techniques for managing their families. Some of the things they write about their children, Kevin's voice broke. Mom, Sarah isn't just controlling. She's part of a whole community of people who think children are enemies to be defeated. That's when the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Sarah wasn't just a narcissist who'd married Kevin for security. She was someone who had specifically targeted a single father, studied his weaknesses, and systematically set about controlling his child. Kevin, I need you to copy everything. Every file, every forum post, every piece of communication. And son, it's time to get Emma out of that house. The custody hearing 3 weeks later was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Sarah arrived looking like the perfect mother. Designer suit, professional hair, carrying a thick folder of evidence about Emma's behavioral problems and my interference. But Patricia had been thorough. She'd compiled Sarah's own words from her computer files, her forum posts, and the detailed behavioral modification protocols she'd documented. When the judge read Sarah's description of Emma as a subject requiring intensive behavioral restructuring, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. "Mrs. Williams," the judge said, addressing Sarah, "can you explain why you refer to your stepdaughter's natural childhood behaviors as infractions requiring corrective measures?" Sarah's mask slipped for just a moment. "Children require structure, Your Honor. Emma exhibited numerous problematic behaviors when I married her father, such as excessive crying, demanding attention, refusing to follow basic instructions." How old was Emma when these behaviors occurred? 3, but age is not an excuse for— "Mrs. Williams," the judge interrupted, "these are developmentally appropriate behaviors for a 3-year-old. Patricia then presented the evidence of Sarah's lies about her credentials, her systematic isolation of Emma, and most damning of all, her own words from the online forums describing children as small tyrants who needed to be broken like wild horses. When they called Emma to speak privately with the court-appointed child advocate, my heart broke for what she was going through. But when she emerged from that office, something had changed in her posture. For the first time in months, she looked directly at me and smiled. The judge's ruling was swift. Temporary custody to Kevin with supervised visitation for Sarah, contingent on her completing parenting classes and psychological evaluation. The restraining order against me was dismissed with prejudice. But the real victory came later that evening when Kevin brought Emma to my house for dinner. As I was making her favorite mac and cheese, the same food Sarah had forbidden as nutritionally inappropriate, Emma started humming. "Daddy," she said, "can we dance while Grandma cooks?" Kevin's eyes filled with tears. "We can dance whenever you want, baby girl." As I watched my son and granddaughter twirl around my kitchen, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Justice. Not the legal kind, though that mattered too. The deeper justice of a family healing, of a little girl getting her childhood back, of a father remembering how to be strong. Sarah's appeals failed. Her psychological evaluation revealed what we'd all suspected: she had no business being around children. 6 months later, Kevin was awarded full custody, and Sarah disappeared back to whatever life she'd lived before she targeted my family. Emma is 9 now, and she laughs every single day. She asks a million questions, makes messes, and dances in the kitchen whenever she feels like it. She's loud and curious, and beautifully, perfectly normal. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's saving someone who can't save themselves and watching them bloom back into who they were always meant to be. The little girl who was shivering in the snow that Christmas Eve is now a confident, happy child who knows she's loved unconditionally. And her grandmother? Well, I learned that being underestimated can be the greatest advantage of all. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.